Do you want to know more about Lightning and JavaScript in Salesforce? In this Part 1 video from 2018, Zayne Turner will be covering the elements of Lightning and JavaScript, which will help you build and grow as a developer and an architect. Welcome, it's Rachel and Jessica from 100 Days of Trailhead, the place where the tech community comes to get inspired. Whether you're brand new to learning Salesforce and starting from the beginning, or mid-career and skilling up for that new opportunity, we are your trail guides here to support you with an itinerary to help you get where you're going. You are in the right place. If you're new to our channel, make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to click on the notification bell so that you can be notified when we release a new video. All the links to everything we mention in this video you can find in the description below. Let's go! In this Part 1 video, Zayne Turner is talking about JavaScript from the Salesforce point of view with information about Lightning or components. Zayne Turner leads the Architect Relations team at Salesforce. She and her team focus on engaging, empowering, and inspiring architects working with Salesforce technologies. Your quest, should you choose to take it, is to journey with us through the adventure of learning JavaScript for Lightning or components. Your quest begins now.
All right, well, without further ado, Zayne, yay!
Hey, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. I was really excited to have Jessica and Rachel ask me to do this because I love geeking out about code and I really love this space that you all have made, and I'm so honored to be here with you all. So thank you, first of all, for spending your time now, and then also just joining this group and being awesome and being who you are, because we all need each other so much. Okay, so I'm going to dive in. We're going to spend a few minutes in a PowerPoint presentation, sort of looking at some basics, and then we're going to dive into a demo and get hands-on with some code. And all the resources I'm sharing, whether it's the code snippets or then the resources I'm going to recommend as next steps, are going to be shared. We'll post them in the Trailhead community group, and you'll be able to get hands-on with all the things that you're going to see here. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Let's share everything. Cool. All right. So instead of starting in Salesforce, we're going to start in PowerPoint, and we will go into presenter mode. Yay. Okay. And can everybody see my screen? Perfect. Okay, cool. So thank you for joining. This is who I am. I'm a developer evangelist with Salesforce, and this is my contact info. If you don't have it already, you can get a hold of me on Twitter. Is the most rapid thing, and that's my email as well. And as you've probably seen before we dive into too many things, as a Salesforce employee, I always want to remind you to make purchasing decisions based on currently available technology, not any of the amazing future-looking statements I'm going to make today. And I don't anticipate making any future-looking statements, but you never know. Today, we're going to be diving in on Lightning and JavaScript as it pertains to Lightning. And this is part one of a two-part session. And this first part, the session today, is really going to ground us in, okay, when we talk about Lightning, what are we talking about? And then how do we start working in this framework when we talk about the Lightning framework? And then we're going to go into, okay, now when you use JavaScript in Lightning, what does that mean? And I'll leave you with some next steps, some things you can do to reinforce what we're going to talk about today, and then also things to get ready for our next session. So when we talk about Lightning, what are some things you think of? You can either put them in chat or you can say them out loud, but what is Lightning? Let me see if I can see chat.
Remember to unmute yourself. We've got UI, we've got components, UI framework.
Awesome. Yes, exactly. This group is on it. So Lightning is, as we can see, a few things. We've got the framework that people have talked about. We've got the new UI. That framework is powering the experience, which users may be focused on. And the third thing that's sometimes overlooked is that Lightning is also a brand new ecosystem. It's creating new vendors in the App Exchange space. It's creating, oh, I'm realizing you guys can probably see my chat. There we go. Okay, it's creating new places for people to share their work with other users of Salesforce, whether it's that Lightning component exchange that you can get to right from Lightning App Builder that has a ton of free components that people are building and sharing, or things like the Lightning Bolt, Lightning Communities. It's creating new places for Salesforce to actually be incorporated into your daily work. And so all of this, though, is being driven from that new framework, which is what we're going to zoom in on together. So let's make sure I'm actually, there we go. So the Lightning framework structure is a change from the traditional Visualforce, which was a server-side language, because it is on the client. When we talk about it being a modern language, the reason that we're calling it a modern framework or a modern language is that it is asking the client, aka the browser, to do more work. And who here would find it useful if I talk about that difference between client and server? Who's really would like some more unpacking of that?
I have a yes, please.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to jump out of the PowerPoint real quick. And let's actually, hold on. We'll go back. Let me get out of full screen. You guys can see how awesome I am at Zoom real quick here. There we go. Okay. And we're going to jump into the browser real quick. So I'm in Salesforce here and I'm in Lightning, but I'm going to go back to Classic and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean about the difference between Visualforce and Classic. So in Classic, when we go to an account record, I'm going to open up Chrome DevTools, which we're going to do a lot of today, but I'm going to go to the Network tab. And I know it's really, really tiny, so don't worry, I'm going to zoom in when it's important. But let's just look at this really, really tiny tab right here. And this Network tab shows us basically the conversation between your browser, the client, and the server or the Salesforce platform. So when I refresh my screen and we see what's going on with the Network tab here, we see a whole bunch of stuff is coming through, right? And the first thing we see here, though, is, if I can get it to zoom, is this, an 18-digit string. Does that look familiar to anybody? I'm sure everyone's nodding. Yes, that 18-digit string is also up here in the URL, and that's our account record. And that's because in the world of Visualforce, the server is literally sending this account as a giant block to the client. My browser is not doing anything except rendering what Salesforce is sending. So this block right here of Pickles Productions and then all these logos is hundreds of lines of HTML that the Salesforce platform is actually defining and sending straight down to the browser. So then when we start building really complex user interfaces like lists with checkboxes and things like that, you can start to see why it gets pretty hard to then respond quickly in the browser, because it's the server that has all the brains. The server is the one that knows what this should look like. But when we switch over into Lightning, so we'll go back into Lightning Experience. I'm going to clear my Network tab in a second, but we'll go back to the same account, clear my tab, I'll refresh my page. And we can see now that the network traffic coming in looks a lot different. I'm not getting that 18-digit string. In fact, my client, my browser, is having to do a whole bunch more work. And that's because now what we're doing with this client-side processing is that Salesforce is sending over information to the browser, and we're expecting the browser to know how to render things. So then that means that the browser can have much more intelligence and can be much more interactive. So that's why Lightning is also not compatible with a lot of older browsers, because those browsers don't have the intelligence, don't have the tools to be able to handle this kind of workload. So when we talk about being client-side, it's that a lot more intelligence of what's going on, what things should look like, what is the user doing when we're clicking or moving around is in the browser. It's on the client. So jump back into. So as we see now, so when we talk about this lovely modern framework, this rendering on the client is a huge difference. We're asking the browser to do more work. Now, when we talk about Lightning, You've probably heard people talking about Lightning components and Lightning applications. And this is just an overview of what are those two things. And we're going to zoom in on components because components, as we see, are flexible. They can appear in Lightning App Builder. And when you're building for Salesforce, when you're building on the platform, you're going to want to start here. Because even if eventually you want it to be outside of Salesforce, components are your reusable bits of code. Apps, as we can see, are self-contained and they don't appear in Lightning App Builder. And what do I mean by components and apps? Well, it's right here. A component, unlike say Visualforce or Apex, instead of just being one file, it's a bundle of files. The actual metadata type is called Aura Definition Bundle because it's a bundle of different files altogether. And so these are the 8 pieces that we can have in components, all the way from our component markup that we're going to talk about, our controller and helper markup, which is where our JavaScript goes. We're also going to look at custom style, all the way down to getting a custom icon that it can appear in App Builder. If you're building an application, you can only have 7 files in it. And the file that drops out is actually the design file. And if I flick back really quickly, our design file is what allows us to expose things in Lightning App Builder. Those things that let admins or other people working in Lightning App Builder customize our components are in the design file. So any guesses as to why when we build a Lightning app, we don't get to have things in a design file? Letting fingers type.
Standalone app, no admin interaction.
Absolutely. It's because Lightning apps cannot appear in Lightning App Builder. So design attributes would not make sense. Okay, so now we're going to get into the demo. And I have a bit.ly link here of a gist that I'm going to share with you. But if people want to be able to look at the code while I'm typing, just go to this bit.ly/part1-gist. It's going to take you to the same thing, and I can copy that into chat if we want. But let's get into the demo. Okay. So we're here in Salesforce. As you can see, this is an app actually that you'll find in Trailhead. This ZBS Lightning app is available in Trailhead. It's for building reusable Lightning components project that we're going to look at in our next session, but I'm using it now just because I wanted to have a simple little app for us to bop around in. So what I want to do is I want to build a custom Lightning component that greets a user when they visit a page, because we're a friendly company at ZBS. So the first step we're going to do is we're going to, of course, go into the developer console. And I'm going to create a new Lightning component. So as we probably guessed, we go to File, New. We're going to choose Lightning Component. And can anyone tell me what should I do if I want this to be able to appear on pages in an application? What option do I need to choose here? Or options?
Record page?
Yes, Lightning record page gets it onto record pages. Anyone know what this Lightning page checkbox does?
Nope.
Awesome. It gets it onto any kind of page. So we have 3 kinds of pages in Lightning: home pages, record pages, and app pages, which are just blank pages that you can do anything with. And this Lightning page toggle will let you put it on any kind of page. Record page is, of course, specific to records. So I'll choose both of those just so that we can see what happens. And I forgot to give it a name, which is not a best practice.
We've got a question. What's a use case to limit it?
That is a great question. So if you are building something that I will check both, and then I'll show you the difference. Actually, that's a great question that we will answer in the next 10 minutes. So I'm going to name this component Hello User, because that's what we're doing here. And I'm going to submit this bundle. And we can see that now, because I'm in the developer console, a few things have happened for me. First of all, this tab right here doesn't have very much information because I didn't enter anything in that description box. So it just gives me the dummy text of a Lightning component bundle. A best practice that I didn't follow could have been putting the purpose of this component right there, because then this tab would suddenly have a lot more information and would tell me what in the world is this component supposed to do. So I could have added, say, a Lightning component that greets users. The next thing we see is we have our tab here of our hello user.cmp, and this .cmp extension relates to this menu right over here, and this is our component markup. And component markup, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's a combination of XML and HTML. So right here is our XML, because Aura component only exists on the Salesforce platform. You can't spin up a WordPress website and try to have Aura component there. But in the middle of our Aura component, if I want to get some text to display, I can go ahead and use HTML and do things like this. And when I save this, no problem. I can mix both HTML and XML. So that's our component file markup. And the dev console is helping us keep track of where we are in this bundle right here on the right-hand side in this navigation menu. It's not only showing us where are we, if I click on these things, it will actually create files for me. So if I click into the controller, I now actually have a controller as a part of my Aura definition bundle. It's adding to my metadata in real time. So if you don't want, say, a custom renderer file, then be careful not to click it because the dev console will make it for you. So we saw when I clicked on controller, it gave me some dummy JavaScript right here. We're going to come back to that in a minute. But right now, we're on our hello user component markup, and I'm going to collapse this. And here on line 1, we can see this giant set of implements tags. These are interfaces that the Salesforce platform provides for us. And that dialog that we had that lets us check those boxes about record page or lightning page, by checking those boxes, this is how we got all of these interfaces on the page. If I created another Lightning component and I didn't check any of the boxes, it would look like this. Let me fix this real quick. This is the basics of what you get with a Lightning component. Of course, it wouldn't have the HTML that I added, but it would just be Aura component with nothing else. And that's because by default, we think that you want to control where your components appear, so that this implements stuff right here on the first line is a way of expanding where your components can appear. So flexi page, available for all page types. That's because I checked the box that said Lightning page, and that means it's available for all page types. Flexi page, available for record home, is because we checked the box for Lightning record pages, and so it's only available, if this was the only tag on there, it's only available on Lightning record pages. And the reason, the difference between the two, which will get us started on the road to answering the question about why you'd want to choose one or the other, is that when you choose this available for record home in the developer console, not if you're in an IDE on your own, but in the developer console, then you automatically get this other interface added called Force Has Record ID. And any guesses as to what Has Record ID might give you?
The ID of the current page.
That's absolutely right. And so if you're available for all page types, you might have a record ID or you might not. Because if you're on, say, a home page, you're not going to have a Salesforce ID to deal with. So that's really the biggest difference between available for record home versus all these other page types, is if you're going to build a Lightning component that absolutely must have a record ID, you might want to think about using the available for record home interface so that somebody who's building a Lightning app and doesn't know any better doesn't accidentally drag your component onto the wrong kind of page. Okay, so we have these three interfaces all hanging out here. No problem, they can all live there at the same time. And so I'm going to save my changes. And now because I have these interfaces here, even though my component isn't very exciting, if we go back into Lightning App Builder and we edit our page to get to Lightning App Builder, and I go down to my custom components, we can see right here, it's already appearing. And that's because of those interfaces. So we can drag the component on the page, and we notice something else that's awesome about Lightning App Builder is that we get a real-time feed of what our component will look like. And if I zoom in, it's pretty tiny, but we can see already, we can see that our text is showing up. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and we'll activate our page, and we'll just assign it as the org default right now. And then I'll go ahead and go back. And all right, so we have our text. Anyone else notice anything odd about this component? Does it look a little different than anything else on the page?
Tracy said it's not in the box. Jennifer said not a white background. Leslie says no background.
Yes, absolutely. And that's because with winter, we got what we called themes, right? And that's this blue banner right here. And in spring, you can see there are many more themes you can even choose from. So with themes come the issue of, if I don't deal with a theme, my components are actually transparent by default. I have to make sure they look like these little white things by adding some different markup. So when I go back to the developer console, I can fix that in a few different ways. And this is the way that I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to add another little bit of HTML here. And we'll come back to that. I'm going to add this. Anyone know what it is I'm doing right here? What is this attribute of class?
Nadina says the style. Bhavana says CSS. Liz says CSS styling. Tammy says applying Lightning Design System. Sue says Salesforce Lightning Design System.
Woo!
CSS styles. Tracy says wrapper.
Ha! I love it. I'm dancing because yes, all of that is right. We added CSS, we added CSS styling, and we added CSS styling that is from, as people were already calling out, the Salesforce Lightning Design System. So the Salesforce Lightning Design System is another difference between Lightning and Classic. When you were trying to build Visualforce pages and you wanted it to look like the rest of Salesforce, it was very difficult to do that without using a few of the just standard pieces we gave you in Visualforce. If you wanted to build something completely custom, but have it look like the list view your users were expecting, it was really difficult. But in Lightning, we took the styling, we took the Lightning look and feel, and we made it available as its own independent CSS framework. So that's what this SLDS part is about. And as we saw, we didn't have to add anything else to our Lightning component. I can just reference SLDS in my component markup because it's part of what we call core. It's part of Salesforce. On every release has SLDS, and you can get at it straight from Lightning. So as you start building your own Lightning components more and more, a site you're probably going to want to bookmark is if you just start typing in getsLDS.com, you can see that I do it a lot. And if I go into getsLDS.com, I'm redirected to the Lightning Design System home website. And going into this components section is awesome because it's a way of seeing bits of UI and not only seeing what it looks like, but then looking at this is the actual CSS markup that you need to use some stuff. And as we can see, we're going to get into this in a second, but on our site here, we see that there's the markup, and I can go through and change it to be different kinds of variants to get it to look the way I want, be the size I want if I want. And we can see that our markup is changing here, and I can copy and paste it straight from here into my component. Just be forewarned that if you take the whole snippet, like here we see, same as Trailhead, you can copy the whole thing. This has not been compiled or checked for correctness. So sometimes there may be bits missing that then when you try to save your component, it's going to shout at you. So just be aware of being careful when you're copying and pasting from the SLDIS website, because the styling markup will be correct, but the tags may not be. Okay, so we added some SLDS here, and I've saved my changes. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to refresh my page. And hey, what do we notice? Suddenly it looks like the other components on the page. And that's because this SLDS card, unfortunately, it's not documented yet. It will be. But this SLDS card is the CSS sort of base styling behind all these components. That's how you get that nice white background. And as we see this tiny, tiny, tiny drop shadow, in fact, there, and make it look like every other component on the page by adding our SLDS card. Okay, so we have markup. It looks like the rest of the page. We're done, right? This is the most useful Lightning component ever. Are we ready to go home? I'm kidding. I'm not going to make you type no. We know that we want to do more with Lightning. So something we could do is, I don't know, maybe give a place for users to put input. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to cheat, and I'm going to go to my gist, and you will get this yourself, but I'm going to just copy this right here. And when I paste it in, any ideas what this is that I just added? I'm adding this thing called Lightning Input. What do we think that might be?
Tammy says input box.
Yeah. Excellent, excellent detective work.
Jennifer says asking user for input.
Yes, exactly. So this is what we added right here. This thing of write your greeting. And then I have something in there called that looks like so-and-so. And we can see it's some placeholder text, and then I can type things. So we added a massive piece of UI, a box with a title and the ability to type into it with one line of code. And that's because we use something called a Lightning base component. And so we learned about the Salesforce Lightning design system, and what Lightning based components do is they take a whole bunch of markup, something that could have taken many lines of HTML, and they do it for you. So these are quick, reusable pieces of UI that then what I did is I said, oh, okay, I want a user to be able to give me some input. And in fact, I want it to be of a text type. We can do checkboxes, we can do dates, we can do numbers, we can do time. There's a whole bunch of Lightning inputs that then will change what they look like based on the type that you want users to input, which also can help with data entry. And I gave it a label. That's how we got that title on there. So if I changed this to say, my favorite example ever, something incredibly useful, and I refresh my page, now we see I've just made the UI a whole lot more confusing. Okay, so we have our Lightning base component. And I also gave it a placeholder text, which is another way of helping users do the right thing and know what it is to do by adding this placeholder of so-and-so. So we have the ability to enter data, but are we doing anything with this data yet?
We've got a few notes.
Absolutely. Yes. Thanks, Rachel. Little did you know that you would be basically just having a conversation with me. Yeah, absolutely. So we have a place for users to put input, but we're not doing anything with it. And to do something with our data, I'm going to add something called an aura attribute to our Lightning component. And I'm going to just type out the basic shape here, and then we're going to come back and fill it out just because I want you to see. So this is the basic shape of this aura attribute. Our aura attribute on here that is just this tag that I just added, and it has a general outline of it needs two things. It needs a name and it needs a type. And I'm going to actually start with type. because this is going to make it easier to guess what we want. So the type is going to be a string, and the name I'm going to give is going to be greeting. All right, what do we think this R attribute might be? I've given it a type with a value of string, and I've given it a name of greeting. What is that looking like? People who are used to, yes, yes.
We've got variables.
It's exactly that, and that's what Aura attributes are. They are a way of storing variable values in your components. You can get at them in your component markup, you can get them at them in your controller markup, and that is what Aura attributes are. They're variables, and they're incredibly powerful. So we have this Aura attribute of greeting, and so in order to then put it into our markup to reference it, I'm going to do curly bracket bang, and as we all know, from things like Flow or Visualforce, that's the universal signal on the Salesforce platform of something dynamic is about to happen. And I'm going to say v dot greeting. And actually, I think I need to change this to match my gist. So hold on, give me a second. I'm going to give it a worse name. Sorry for bad variable naming, but we're going to call it so-and-so so that it matches the gist and we're all on the same page. So I'm referring to it by just doing this right here, v dot so-and-so. V dot means, what do we think? Or v, what does v mean? I like it. Variable would be a good way of remembering it. Other people have said view. I like JD, this, exactly. So v, whatever way you want to remember, but v, because we're going to have a lot of dots happening in Lightning, v dot, it almost equates to view. It means something in our component markup here. It means probably an Aura attribute. Those get the v dots. And when we start writing our JavaScript, it's going to be important to be able to remember that. So we have v dot so-and-so because we have an attribute called so-and-so. So when I save this and I refresh the page, what do we think is going to happen to our text? What are we going to see on the screen, do we think? Same thing, okay. On the page right now. So we can see we have our thing right here. So I'm going to refresh my page. Make sure I'm actually in Chrome. And we see it disappeared, kind of. What's going on? What did we take out? Well, we got rid of the there and we replaced it with so-and-so. So what's happening? What's going on with so-and-so? Yeah, there's no user input, it's undefined, exactly. So this is sort of shadowing what we're going to talk about next time. Like all things in Salesforce, there's more than one way to do this. So for now, I'm going to do it the fastest way, and I'm going to give another attribute right here. Default equals, and when I add this default attribute, and I go back and refresh my page, we can see that, hey, look at that. It's no longer undefined, we've given it a value. So that's awesome. That's one way to do this. But when I type in a greeting, what's happening? Is our attribute responding?
Tammy says nothing.
No, nothing, right? It's a disconnected form. We're not connecting the two things together, because what we need to do now is we need to use data binding. So that's what gives our components a dynamic feel, is this ability to have data binding. So what I can do right here is add another attribute to our Lightning base component of value. And here, I'm going to give it a value of all right. So what is that? So I'm giving it a value of v dot so-and-so, and what do we know what is v dot so-and-so referring to?
Sue
Yeah.
says the variable.
The variable. Yep, exactly. That's our dynamic syntax for our variable. So when I refresh, let me make sure, actually, let's go back. I did not save. So let me save first. And then let's refresh our page. And now we see that our default value for so-and-so is appearing right here. I've blown away my placeholder text. Oopsie. We'll come back to that in a minute. But now we have our thing. And then when I do things like right? It gets a lot more exciting. We can see that in real time, what we're typing is appearing on the screen. And it's because not only are we doing data binding, but the fact that we are client side, our browser is smart, means that it's two-way data binding. So it means that as users do things, the value is updated in real time. I don't have to query for it like I used to in Visualforce. I don't have to worry about trying to pass back an updated value. It's going to be updated with what the user is doing because of this thing right here. I said that its value should be set to that attribute. So when a user types in, we've got it. Okay, so we have two-way data binding. I'm actually going to get rid of my default value here because I want my placeholders to show back up. So we have data binding. We have the ability to enter text, but I said that I wanted this thing to actually greet a user. So I need to have some logic. I need to have more things happening. And unfortunately, I can't just pull the user in my markup here. So we've got to go get some additional logic going in our component. And we know that because it's client side, that means that our controller logic, oh, hold on, we got to refresh the dev console. My dog says hello, everyone. If you are hearing squeaky noises, it's my dog being jealous. And when we go into the dev console, pop back out my menu, here we go. And this controller is where the brains of our component will live. And actually, we're going to get into this next time, but we have two hemispheres of a brain. We have a controller and a helper, like a right and left brain. And we're going to just stay over here in the controller in our left brain today. And what I want to do is I'm actually going to rename this. Well, we'll leave it for a second. I'm going to add, I want to do something with my variable right here. So we have our so-and-so attribute right here. And what we're going to do is really simply, I'm just basically going to print it to the equivalent of the debug log, but it'll be our JavaScript debug log. So I'm going to declare a variable, and I'm just going to give it a great name like my favorite name. And I'm going to try to grab the value that our component has. So I'm going to do component.get, and then v dot, and how should I complete this? What did we call our variable? Yeah, so-and-so. V dot so-and-so. Right here. This is why it's good to remember what's pointing where. So v dot so-and-so is our variable. And to print it to our debug log is actually console.log. JavaScript fans rejoice. All right. So I have an action here. I'm printing to the console.log. It's great. Now, those of you that are a little bit more familiar with JavaScript, does this look like 100% straightforward JavaScript? Is this exactly what we would write? Yeah, exactly.
No.
Everybody's like, no. Because it's not, and you're absolutely right. So in Lightning, one of the biggest differences is our JavaScript is in the form actually of a JSON object first and foremost. And another awesome thing about the dev console is that it tries to help you by not only pairing things by turning it green, but with these little collapsible arrows. So when I collapse my JSON object, because JSON is a name value pair separated by a colon here, this is our JSON, we see that my name of my function is my action, and its value is now all of this JavaScript. This is our JavaScript right here. So that's why it looks a little weird, because your JavaScript is in the form of a name value pair. So if I want to add more code, this is a best practice I've started getting myself into. I actually need to add a comma here because my next bit of logic in my controller would need to be another name value pair. So I often tag things like this. And this trailing comma will not prevent it from saving. It will not prevent it from running. It's totally fine to have it. So it's a good little bookmarker for yourself to know how you're going to keep track of things, because especially as you start getting a lot of functionality in your controllers and your helpers, all of these JSON objects all together are pretty hard to keep track of without something like that. Okay, so I have a function. As we see here, it's an anonymous function, but I've given it a name of my action, and I'm passing in 3 things. And the developer console gave me this out of the box, but I can go ahead and delete any one of them and it will still save. The reason I may not want to delete them though is, like, let's say I get rid of component. Where else do we see component referred to in my function? Yep, in that get, in line 3. So if I don't let my function right here see my component, it can't get at my attributes. So that's probably a problem. So component means this actual markup right here and all its logic. Helper means this thing right here. It means it can talk to the helper file. And the event means the reason this function is firing. It knows why it's being fired. Is it being fired because someone clicked something? Because it was some other sort of instance? It knows why things are happening. So that's what these 3 arguments are that we're passing in. So we have our event here. It's great. I have my component. So now when I refresh the page, let's go back here. I'm going to open up my developer tools, because the reason console.log is awesome is because right here on the console, things that you write to console.log should show up down here. So when I refresh the page, let me go back to our markup real quick. What do people think should show up in console.log? What do we think should show up? Right, the value of cucumber. Okay, so we're going to refresh the page. And we're going to see absolutely nothing. Any ideas why? This is kind of a trick question, but any ideas why we're not seeing my console.log message? So-and-so has no value yet. Any other ideas? No user input. Cucumber doesn't have a value. The issue, yes, Tammy got it. The issue was the event wasn't triggered. And I spent, the reason I'm asking the trick question, the mean question, is because it was one of my biggest sort of aha but dumb moments when I started writing Lightning components, was I spent a lot of time getting frustrated about things not having a value, or, oh, did I do something wrong in my markup, before I realized I wasn't firing my events. So the way we fire this event right here is to actually add something called an aura handler. So we're going to add an aura handler, and there's some guts that we need to add to it. And then I'm going to jump back to my gist real quick to show you. So as we scroll down here, our aura handler, I'm going to copy it, and then we'll change it to match our event markup, has a few different things that need to go into it. So again, just like all the rest of this, this is XML provided by the platform, and the aura handler is what lets you fire some events, explicitly fire some events. And as we're going to talk about next week, there's, again, more than one way to do it, but one of the ways is a handler. So now the action here I'm going to call is actually my action. All right. Based on what we know about dynamic markup, what do we think this is right here in line 4, that c.myAction? What is that referring to? Yeah, that thing in my controller, right? This thing right here called my action. If I changed this to cucumber, because why not have something named the same thing all over the place? What should I change this to? What should the syntax right here be? Yep, c.cucumber, exactly. Okay, so I'm gonna change it back though to my action. And we have our handler here. It's gonna fire the c.myAction. And the value here, this thing right here, is these last two tags are very special. These two tags are because what I wanna do is I wanna fire my action when the component is instantiated or when it's first created. I don't want a user to have to click anything. I don't want to have to wait for it to happen. I want my logic, my action to fire when the component is created on the page. And that's why I'm using this syntax of passing a this value, which means this whole component that's being created. And this name init lets me know that it's on instantiation or on initialization. So this is the sort of special shape you're going to see for these events we want to fire as a component is created. Okay, so I'm going to save my markup. So now I have a handler, and I'm saying, please fire this when we create the component. We have our action here. So now let's see what happens. I'm going to clear my console and refresh the page. And hey, what are we seeing right there? Zooming in. Ta-da! Now we see undefined. So everyone who guessed that cucumber had no value, pat yourself on the back because you are 110% right. So we're printing now to console.log, which is awesome. We're firing our logic, but the value of our so-and-so attribute is undefined. And in fact, I'm going to copy in some more logic here, and let's get even more specific with our logic. And I'm going to change these back to my action. All right, what did I just do? What's this on line 4? What kind of code is that? Yeah, exactly. A conditional statement, an if statement, and I'm saying if it's null, if it's undefined. That's exactly what line 4 is saying. And if my var, which is the name I gave to our so-and-so attribute now, if it's undefined, we should print this to our console. And if it has a definition, then we're going to see something else. So I'm going to save this. Just like a lot of other languages, we have our flow statement right here. So when I refresh my page, drum roll please, ta-da! We're seeing our undefined message value, exactly. Okay. So how can we get a value here for so-and-so? I'm gonna sneak back here. I'm gonna copy this. As we said, there's more than one way to do this. So we saw one way was to add a default value right here, right? But I don't wanna do that. I wanna do it only when it's instantiated because I don't wanna override a user value. I want it to be dynamic. So I'm gonna paste in more code. All right. And what am I doing here? If we look at this, what are we doing on lines 3 and 4? Yep. So when I refresh, cool. I've seen some awesome guesses. So when I refresh my page, ta-da! We are seeing our value because just like other languages, I've declared a variable right here and I can work with that variable. So I can hard code a value in and control my logic right here. Just like any other language. Now, what am I doing on line 9? Let's go back at the UI and look. What do we notice happening in our UI? right? We do not see so-and-so. Exactly. We're seeing the value of the thing I hard coded. So we just saw when we do component get, we're grabbing the value that a user entered. And so when we do component set, it's just the opposite. We're going to go ahead and put a value into an attribute. So right here, I'm saying I want this attribute that we have in our UI to equal the value I gave to my var. And that's happening right here. All right. So we have some logic wired up. We know how to do conditional statements. Aha, nice. Liz, you're already on it. Exactly. This is the next step right here. How do we not hard code? Could we reach out to a custom label? Absolutely, you could reach out to a custom label. Yep. So let's do that. Let's be dynamic. Let's not hard code this. Let's do what we set out to do in the first place. And what we want to do is we want to greet a user by name, right? So let's do that thing. And to do that, we need to do a couple things. First, we have to write some Apex. I'm sorry to say, it's just a limitation right now because I want to grab some information about the user. I'm going to need to go to Apex first. So right here, I have a class that has an Aura-enabled method. And I've actually already created this class, so let's look at it. Our user info helper here. We'll open it up. And Aura-enabled, has anyone worked with the Aura-enabled annotation before? You can just type yes in the chat if you have. So great. So Rita, I'm going to pick on you. What does it do? What does Aura-enabled let you do with your Apex? Yes, that's 100% right. It lets you get at it from Lightning. It exposes it to Lightning. Yep. So we're exposing this method called getUsername to Lightning. And the way that we expose it to Lightning, now by adding this Aura-enabled annotation, it doesn't just suddenly mean that anything in Lightning can see this method. That would not be very helpful. We have to do something else in our Lightning component to be able to see Apex. Any guesses about what we have to do in our Lightning component to get it to be able to see this method? Yeah, that's right. We have to, and we do have to call it, Tracy. Yes, and we have to add a controller. So this is where it can get kind of confusing and the terminology gets a little swirly, and I apologize on behalf of everyone who writes code. We have to add controller equals in our first line here, and the name of my Apex class is what I want to put in there. So I'm going to say user info helper. Okay, so this piece means that our Lightning component can now see this class and it can see all the Aura-enabled annotations in this class. If I wanted to add another class to it, I could just add a comma and put another class name here. So that's how we get it to be able to see this code. But now, as Tracy said, we have to call this code. And this is the piece that gets a little more complex. And this gets into the difference between how we call things in Visualforce and how we call things in Lightning. So I'm going to copy in our logic here, and then let's walk through it. Okay. Okay. So on line 3, I'm declaring a variable called action. And can anyone, let's try to get some guesses at what is going on here. What are we getting from our component? Yeah, the action that will get the username, exactly. And what do we notice about this? If this were an attribute, what would my letter here be if I wanted to call so-and-so? Yes, exactly. And so C here is referring to, what do we think C means right here? Controller. That's exactly what it means, and that's why it gets confusing. So the C means this controller, even more crazily. So when you're in your controller.js and you see a C dot, think Apex. Thanks, Leslie. Cucumber also. When you're in your JavaScript controller and you see a C dot, think, okay, we're talking to Apex. When I'm over here, how did we call our my action? Uh-oh, yep, exactly. It's also a C. So when you're in your component markup and you see C dot, where should you go look? What file do you need to go look at? That's right, the JavaScript controller. Because Lightning is controlled by JavaScript, unlike Visualforce, where if we were writing Visualforce and we said controller equals user info helper, we know the brains of our Visualforce page live in Apex, so we'd go look at that Apex class. But in Lightning, this just means I can see something in Apex. It actually has nothing to do with the brains of our Lightning component, because our brains are in JavaScript. Okay, so we have this, we're getting here now, we're talking to our Apex class, and we're saying, okay, please, I would like a copy of get username. And when I go back to my Apex class, I can see that that is the name of my method, right? So I'm getting a copy of this method, and it accepts no arguments. If it did accept arguments though, I could do this right here. And come back to it. What is this right here? What is this shape? Ah, actually, I didn't give you the whole answer. Let's do. Yes, exactly. It is JSON. Thanks, JD, for saving me. It's a name value pair. And the name value here, action is our variable that we just said, but our variable has a value of, it's an Apex method. This is where JavaScript gets wild and crazy. Our variable action could be, hold on. So on line 3, what is the value of action? Yep, it's banana. It's a string. Its value is banana. On line 4, what did I do? What's its value now? Yes. Tracy, got it. This is now the value of action. Wrap your mind around this. The data type is now no longer a string. The data type is now this entire method. Because we're in the land of JavaScript, which is loosely typed. And it's okay if you don't understand that right now, but just be aware that now action is an entire Apex function. Yep. And we can do that. And you know what I can do on line 5? Now what's the value of action? Yep, that's JavaScript. So I'm going to get rid of this stuff that we don't need real quick. All right, and let's look at what we do have. Okay, so we have the value of action is a copy of this Apex method. And what is this Apex method doing? Well, it's returning a value, and the value has what data type? What is this method going to return? Yep, it's a string. And this userinfo.getName, do we have a guess about what that might be? Yep, the name of the user. Perfect. Okay, so we have a value of a method that returns a string. And then we have a whole bunch of other stuff. And right here, this action dot set callback. This is actually a method provided by Salesforce. So this dot set callback means, hey, Salesforce, yep, and I'm going to talk faster now. The set callback means that Salesforce is going to do something for us. And what is this shape again? People who know JavaScript, what are we seeing right here in lines 5 through 9? Yes, we're seeing another name value pair. We're seeing more functions. So we're doing something with this function here. And on line 6, I'm declaring another variable, and it's of response.getReturnValue. And then I'm putting it in the console. And then I'm setting the value of our variable to this variable I just declared. So I'm going to go ahead and save this real quick. And then I'm going to refresh the page. Yep. I'm going to refresh the page real quick so that we can see what's happening. And what did we print to our console? What's the value of so-and-so? Yeah, because my username is user. Because I used Salesforce DX, and that's the default name that Salesforce DX gives you in a Scratch org. Now my secret is out. So we see that we printed the value of my user. We got that value from our Apex class. So let's go back and look at how this happened. So how did we actually fire this thing? How did we talk to the server? Well, we actually had to do a loop. So we started by getting a copy. Let me get rid of our extra stuff. We started by getting a copy of our Apex method.
Zayne, I don't mean to interrupt, but
Yep.
can we do a quick little bio break, and then we can all just come back and start right here since Zoom is having an issue?
When we last met, we had called the server successfully, and we had a value in our attribute. And now we're unpacking, how did that happen? What did we do? And I'm going to separate a few things here. Okay. So we know that this set callback is another JSON object. We're going to skip over that for a second. And let's look at line 12, because line 12 is how we're actually firing our event. I'm going to tell you that right now. This is how we're actually getting Lightning to talk to the server. And this $$ is just like in Visualforce when you do a $ there. It's a global variable. And so $A means the Aura framework, because Lightning is built on an open source JavaScript library called Aura. So the Aura framework is that $A. And on the Salesforce platform, we expose a few things about the Aura framework for you to work with in your Lightning components. And one of them is in queue action. And so has anyone worked with queuable Apex or queuable functions at all? Is that word sounding familiar? Is queuable synchronous or asynchronous? Just off the top of our heads. Yep, exactly. So it's not real time. But when we refresh our Lightning component, so we're using something here that sounds not synchronous. It's asynchronous. But when I save my controller and I refresh my page, it seems like this whole getting my username and putting it back and writing to the console, that seems pretty synchronous, doesn't it? So what's happening here? Well, it's because we're in the land of JavaScript. And there's a resource that I'm going to share with you that goes into way more detail about this than I can go into right here. And it's also really awesome and funny. But one of the things about JavaScript is how it executes. So JavaScript doesn't wait for things to happen. If I have a synchronous call out in, say, Visualforce, and it takes 10 minutes to get a response from whatever I'm doing, and I do it synchronously, say I have a user hit a button, how long is a user going to sit there in the world of Visualforce for that thing to complete? 10 minutes. That's exactly right. In JavaScript, if that call out takes 10 minutes, it doesn't matter. JavaScript's going to keep going. It doesn't wait for things to happen, even when it's doing something immediately. That's not how it behaves. So the way that we call to the server is asynchronous because JavaScript isn't going to wait anyway. And this whole in-queue action is Salesforce saying, okay, JavaScript executes a little differently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the server, and the server may take a long time to respond. And I don't want your application to get all confused and to get muddled about what's happening. So when the server gets back with a response, we'll handle it. And that action set callback lines 6 through 10 is basically a promise. It's saying, hey, when the server gets back, please do these other things. And so here, our server is getting back to us really quickly. It seems synchronous, so it seems real time. But it's actually, if we go down to the microseconds, asynchronous. So this is the pattern for call and response to the server. If you want to talk to an Apex server, you first of all get your method that you want to call, tell the application what you want it to do when the response comes back, and then ask Lightning to fire that action for you. That's the pattern we're seeing right here. So what did we want our component to do when that response came back? Well, line 7, we're declaring a variable called server response. And what do we think this response thing is? Exactly. It's our response from the server. And this is the syntax you're going to want to use right here. This whole line 6 of the this comma function response is the pattern you're going to see in that set callback. Because what we're doing is we're giving it the component. Again, that's the this word. And then the function is whatever's coming back from the server, and the response is that server response. This is the words you're going to want to use. And so now we're going to see that our response get return value is actually literally whatever kind of data type your method will return. If this was an array, it will be an array. So our return value here is our string. And that's why then when we print it to console.log, what we see is a string. If it were an array, you would see the array in that as well. And then the last thing we're doing on line 9, this should start looking familiar. What are we doing on line 9? Yes, we're setting our variable of so-and-so, and we're setting its value to the response from the server. So that's why we now see in the UI, if I can switch back in a way that makes sense. Let me close my console. Just move it down. Now we see that we have a value. Everywhere I've put that attribute, everywhere we put so-and-so, we have a value. And that's because of that call and response to the server and the setting of the variable. Making sense? All right, so that is the bulk of what we have as far as the actual code markup. So you'll get this gist. You can go through and recreate our incredibly useful, wonderful Lightning component yourself with all of our detours. And if I zoom back into PowerPoint, so we covered, let me jump back to what we covered. We covered the basic of component markup. We talked about what it means to work client side. We started looking at the JavaScript basics, that JSON object and then the function and the parentheses. We know we're not 100% fluent yet, but we're getting there. So next time, what we're going to do is we're going to go deep into the idea of events and that JavaScript. We're going to look at controller and helper events. How do we fire things in the helper? How do we get the controller to talk to the helper? How do we get them to talk to things based on what users are doing? Much more complex things in the JavaScript. And there are things you can do in the meantime to get much more comfortable in the basics of what we talked about together. So I have 2 things here. Let me go ahead and present it much bigger. I made 2 bit.ly links, but again, you're going to get this presentation. I'm going to send it to Rachel and Jessica right after this so that there will be no delay. But these bit.ly links lead to a trail mix that I made. That bit.ly lightning-mix has 4 things in it based on just our first session. So these are things that are going to reinforce what we talked about here. And then next time, when we get together and talk about event handling, I'm going to add things to that same trail mix that are going to do this reinforce event handling. So that trail mix will grow. So make sure you follow it so you get notified when there are updates. And the second resource here, this bit.ly link that is OO to JS, is actually an article that was written a while ago by a gentleman named Steve Yeager that is hilarious, and it goes much more in depth into that pattern of behavior we saw about that asynchronous call that is that's great about the behavior of JavaScript. So these are things you can do right now, especially with your hours of code coming up. You'll hopefully have plenty of time to complete it. And we have time for questions, I think, and I just want to thank you for hanging out with me.
Thank you so much, Zayne. That was amazing. I think that everybody would agree. And we'll just open it up to questions. Feel free to unmute yourself and just jump right in. And and then we can just go into just general discussion.
I have a question, Zayne.
Yeah.
So we're doing all of this maybe in a sandbox or scratch org. So then how do you get these components do you use change sets? How do you get them moved into production?
That's a great question. You can use change sets. Yeah, you can do a metadata deployment as well. So they'll come over just like any other code will. You could put it in change set. Yep. You just look for, I think in the UI even you can look up components. It may appear under as Aura definition bundle. That's the last time I made a change set. I'm giving myself away. So yeah.
Okay.
Test classes. I'm seeing a question. So no. So Lightning testing is a great question. We have been talking about Lightning testing, I know, for a while, and some people have put together ways to test your Lightning using things like Jasmine, which is a framework for testing. And I know that we're working on a Lightning testing service. I don't have an ETA on when that's going to be generally available, but I know we're building it and it's being actively developed right now. But that's a thing about Lightning, is that if the code that we wrote in our controller or the code that we write in our helper doesn't have to be tested. There is no limit as far as you can't deploy this without 75% test coverage, because the Lightning testing framework isn't in place yet. And also the way Lightning behaves is enough different that the way we want to enforce quality code is more about things like locker service and security rather than the way we had to do it in Apex, which is test classes. Now my Apex controller, my user info class, would still need to have test coverage.
Do you have a resource so that we can better understand how to use the console in the Chrome browser?
Oh, that's a great question. I will share that into the community when I find something, because there are some things about it, but I didn't include them in this, so I should do that.
And with that, I would like to learn more about like setting breakpoints so that I can monitor what's going on. Yeah,
me too, actually. That's a good homework for all of us, because breakpoints in the console are magical. Yeah. So I'm seeing Leslie had a question about XML, HTML, JavaScript, and Apex, and where each of these are used in the example component. So let me flip over to the developer console again real quick, and let's look at that. So in the developer console, my handy dandy little menu here. So layer 1 here, our component markup. This is where you're going to see your XML and your HTML. That's where that lives, right here. And I know that by looking at it, but the extension is another way of remembering. It doesn't say literally HTML and XML, but it's not .js. And if we look at our controller, the .js extension tells us that this should be JavaScript. The same thing will happen with our helper here, is we're going to see the extension of our helper when my mouse wakes up and lets me actually click on the helper. Hello, there we go. You now see that I've created a helper.js file for this bundle. And the same thing will happen with style.css, tells me this should be CSS. So the extensions of your file names will help you know what goes where, because it can get confusing. And that's why when I started writing Lightning components, the developer console has a lot of sort of nice built-in guardrails to kind of help keep it straighter, so you know, okay, well, where am I? Oh, I'm in the style thing, and oh, its extension is .css.
We only have a few more minutes. Does anybody else have any questions?
Yes. So I'm trying to learn things like buttons, like standard buttons. So you might have a save, a cancel. How do you approach, is there good sites, good blogs, or how would you approach searching for just a simple thing like cancel?
A cancel button, that kind of thing? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the resources that we're going to get into this next time actually is, this is our trail mix, but I'm going to search for, I was just looking at this today, so that's why I know this is here. So this override a standard action with Lightning components, if you're talking about it specifically in Lightning, not JavaScript. In Lightning, this project right here, which I'm going to add to the trail mix for next time, does go through what should a cancel button do? How do you call that? And that refers to the actions that you're going to use there go back to that $a Aura framework that we saw. There are actions that the Aura framework has and that Lightning Data Service has, that we didn't even talk about this time, that can help you do things like save records or update records or cancel a choice a user made and take them back to the right record. So there are resources here that can help you depending on what you're trying to do. The other place to look, if you're writing in Lightning and you want to know more about the thing I just said, that Aura framework, I'm going to just search for $. And if, oh, we see that that's a bad search. So now we're going to do Salesforce Lightning. Ta-da. And you can see that there's a Stack Exchange post, but even more, I'm going to go into the Lightning Components Developer Guide. And we're going to see that I can look for the $. Here. And actually, I know it's kind of annoying. It's down here, and it will tell you all of the things that you can do with that $. Reference. It's all in this area down here as your friend.
Okay. Thank you.
All that. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Zayne. Thank you, every single member that is here today, and those of you who wish to be on the journey for 100 days of code so you can practice what you've learned, or you don't have to work on this. You can work on something else. We encourage you to get in there, and you can post in the Trailblazer community for WWDUG, or if you're on Twitter, you can mention WWDUG. There's other people out there that are doing it. Typically, you just put what day you're at, what you did, and, that's about it. So 100 days of code is just dedicating 1 hour. You can do more, but just dedicating 1 hour for 100 days. Thank you so much to everyone. And does anybody have any kind of community announcements? We have Zayne next month doing part 2 of this.
And with that, we're at the end. Are you new to JavaScript and Lightning Aura components? Are you building Lightning Aura components? What has your experience been like? Comment below. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you've made it to this point, we want to take an opportunity to thank you. Since you have, here's a bonus. There are many ways to attain and improve your skills with JavaScript. If you are a beginner and want to understand the principles of JavaScript, you can start for free on Codecademy. The JavaScript course will teach you the concepts you need to begin your learning path. Thank you for spending time with us. Make sure you like this video. It helps a lot. Click subscribe and on the notification bell so you never miss another video. We also handpick these videos, which we recommend you watch next. You can talk to us on Instagram, Twitter, and on our website at 100daysoftrailhead.com, all of which are listed below. Thank you for learning with us, and we'll see you back tomorrow.